Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. Today we meet the fine folks from the Gilead Community Services, and we will do that when we come back, so stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guests today are from Gilead Community Services. Up first is the Executive Director and CEO, Barry Simon. First of all, welcome to the show.
So thanks, Sean, for having us.
So tell people what Gilead Community Services is or are.
So Gilead started out as a grassroots effort back in the 60s. Wesleyan students had a project that they started to help clients move out of Connecticut Valley Hospital and into the community. And the thought was that if you supported the clients by living with them, providing help, support, that they would actually be able to stay in the community and not go back into the hospital. So the mission was really to help people be independent. And that mission that started out in the 60s continues to be our mission today. So we have expanded our services over time. So now we have about 200 staff and we serve about 600 clients, living in all kinds of different situations throughout the community. We have everything from outpatient clinics to group homes and everything in between.
Has the core goal changed from those humble beginnings? Obviously you've expanded, but is the same kind of general purpose of letting people live independently still there? Is that the main goal?
Yeah, the mission has remained the same throughout our 45 years, and that's kind of one of the great things about Gilead has been we are a healthcare agency, so we are definitely a traditional medical services when it comes to therapists, doctors, nurses, case managers who provide all kinds of medically necessary services, but those services are also very recovery oriented, so they tend to meet the clients where they're at in order to help them maintain whatever level of independence they are. And so for some individuals, the level of independence may be a group home, and for others it's coming into an outpatient clinic like you or I would go into.
How urgent or needed or necessary are the services that you provide? Are they for people these days? I mean, what would it be like without a place like a community service like yours?
Well, the beauty of living, in this moment in history is healthcare reform is rolling full steam ahead.
It's around the corner, right?
Absolutely.
Is that a good thing?
Well, it's a good thing. As far as I know, the head is part of the body.
And an important part.
An important part. And so, really the integration of psychiatric care with medical care makes total sense to me. And to others. So we're kind of in a really neat moment in time. The challenge is how those services are going to happen, how they're going to get paid for, and figuring that out. So there's a lot of work that's being done throughout the state right now, whether it's figuring out what health homes are going to be, health neighborhoods, accountable care organizations. All of these things are concepts that are rolling out as part of healthcare reform.
What is the state of healthcare these days before reform rolls around? Because that definition could change once that happens. But as it stands right now, what is it?
So, the state of healthcare reform is very fluid, I would say. That Connecticut happens to be a leader in what's happening, and so that as an early adapter, there's a lot of pilot project things that are happening
kind of a guinea pig
right now.
I guess, right?
So a bit of a guinea pig or a bit of a maverick.
Right. That's a better word to use.
It is happening, and it needs to happen. And so with that comes the challenge of figuring it out. So within Connecticut, more people are going to be insured. More people are going to have access to both physical health and mental health care than they did before. But the challenge is going to be making sure that the providers are there to accept the people. And so as the CEO of an organization, I'm very committed to the mission, but I also need to make sure that our agency stays fiscally viable. And so making sure that reimbursements actually are able to pay for the services that we provide is something that everybody's being challenged with right now.
That's a good point, and we were talking about off the air. You, as executive director and CEO, you kind of had a vision that you'd be developing and creating a lot of programs, and I don't know if the word is unfortunately, but you find yourself up on Capitol Hill a lot with the legislatures working that angle, so to speak, as opposed to being able to be with your services and kind of developing those. So talk about that a little bit.
So policymakers are obviously responsible for allocating our tax dollars. They're the stewards. So educating them about efficient ways to utilize those tax dollars is something that I feel very passionate about and committed to. So there are significant savings that can happen within our state if the right services are in place. So for instance, individuals who have been in institutional care for years and years at a cost of $365,000 a year can be moved into the community if the proper services are there. And so we're able to provide the doctors, the nurses, the living environment that allows for individuals to move out of institutional care and into the community at a cost of approximately $125,000 a year. So if you're doing the math, if you're able to move 5 individuals out of institutional care and into the community, that saves the state about $1.5 million.
So if you can kind of convince them that by making a few changes and tweaks and allocating funds maybe through these sources, that they can actually save money.
Absolutely.
And they like to hear that,
so,
right?
Absolutely. And it creates jobs at the same time. So the challenge in any kind of systemic change is how do you have that happen where it becomes a win-win for all parties involved. And so part of what we do in talking to state officials and and legislators is educating them on the things that can be going on in the community. And the example I gave is a high-end service, but the same could be said for low-end services. That providing housing support for somebody so they can live in their home as opposed to being homeless. Significant savings that can be done there.
Do they get it? Do politicians understand what you're trying to say to them, or do they have more of the mindset of just kind of whatever the constituents of theirs want, that's what we're going with? And like you mentioned to me earlier about they want consolidation. That's their buzzword that they like to use.
Yep. Consolidation, results-based accountability. I mean, those are all buzzwords that
they
are
really
that
are.
are
They
talked
love
a lot
using
about
those.
up at the Capitol. But we have a significant impact on the clients that we serve and their ability to stay in the community. And thank goodness that we live in a society that allows for everybody to have equal rights and to live in the community. So for our clients, to have that opportunity is something that I feel really passionate about. And educating our elected officials on
stewards of the money, of the funding, right?
Happens all the time. So,
you seem, from your position, you would seem to be in favor of definite health care reform, correct? So when 2014 rolls around, this is a big deal for you, correct?
Yeah.
I just want to ask you, just to flip it around from, like, for example, the business owner's point of view that argues that that will cost them money. What do you say to them to kind of get them on board?
So, well, the big thing is that it's hard to look at it as a total system change, because right now, business, we're all paying for it anyway, but in different ways. So the hope is that getting individuals onto health care at every level and then coordinating that care, it'll have better outcomes. And I will say firsthand that where we do case management on our clients and where we help integrate the physical health and the mental health care, it absolutely works. Clients who, for instance, would have diabetes that could go uncared for, or individuals who are making multiple trips to the emergency room because of their mental health issues, when we help case manage that, there are fewer trips to the emergency room and there are fewer complications because of the medical health issues that they have. So overall, it can work. The challenge is going to be putting the whole system in place to allow that to happen. So it's, in some ways, it's having faith
Yeah.
in it, and for everybody being willing to participate.
And it's not, it seems like we talk about funding and money a lot, but I guess it's not just about money. It's the ability to change and to kind of incorporate into a new system and funding, and can people acclimate into it fairly easily? And it's just, will it be a smooth transition? Is this something that's doable?
So I hope and I believe that it's doable.
Yeah.
I am active.
You have to.
Yes, I have to,
Yeah.
and we are actively a part of it. So, to the extent that the meetings are happening around the state, it is imperative that as healthcare providers, we're openly and honestly participating in it and getting educated on. The policymakers need to be doing the same. And for us as an industry, the challenge is going to be that a lot of this has technical implications for us. So we have to have electronic medical records that can communicate with other providers.
That's a good point.
We have to have credentialed providers that are able to be reimbursed through the reimbursement systems that are in place. I have to hire therapists, doctors, nurses, case managers that are able to do the appropriate kinds of paperwork that have to happen in order to satisfy whatever the funding sources are. The challenge ends up being that we have been underfunded for a significant amount of time, and so in order to put the infrastructure in place, we need to have appropriate funding that treats us as a business within the state. So to go for basically 25 years of less than 1% increases, and now 5 years of zero, makes it really difficult to run the business side of things.
Yeah.
And so
with no money, it's kind of tend to make it
that's
difficult.
a challenge. And being what's considered a safety net service, everybody wants us around.
Right.
People see the value in that. And that's a real positive thing. But understanding how we need to be able to support the individuals who are both getting our services, but also who are providing our services is an important thing.
I want you to give out the website so people can go and learn more about Gilead Community Services.
www.gileadcs.org.
And I told you there just would not be enough time in these segments, so we are out of time for yours. Barry Simon, the Executive Director and CEO of Gilead Community Services. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Sean.
We do have more to get to, so we'll take a break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. In this second segment, we're still chatting with the fine folks, by the way, from Gilead Community Services. Now we have board member and parent advocate Fran Ludwig. So first of all, welcome to the show for you.
Thank you, Sean.
So tell us the role of a board member / parent advocate. What is that exactly?
Well, I would say my primary role is being a parent. I have a son who lives with both developmental disabilities and mental illness. So the first 20 years of his life, I was his mother and staff and nurse and psychiatrist and psychotherapist. And
It's a lot of burden on one person.
it was a huge burden. And as you can imagine, it's a huge burden on a family.
Yeah.
So that has been my primary role, and that is the way I became connected with Gilead.
I'd like to have you shed some light on mental illness in general, and kind of a layman's definition of what it is, and maybe some misconceptions that people might have.
It's a good question, and I can assure you that my son didn't wake up one day and raise his hand and say, "I'd like to have a mental illness."
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he is acutely aware of his limitations and the impact that they have on his life. So it's not an easy thing to live with. You would be amazed at how pervasive it is. Probably there's very few families that are not touched in some way by mental illness. Anxiety, depression are certainly part of it.
Some probably go undiagnosed too, I would imagine, right?
I'm sure many do. People with mental illness can hold jobs. They are not stupid. My son happens to be very bright, very funny, but they live with often things going on in their heads that you and I don't, which can interfere with their functioning. So.
And another thing that you mentioned was, in his case, your son's case, he is aware of his limitations, correct?
He's very aware. And so it's learning to function in a world, as his therapist says, with a broken compass. He's trying to navigate a world that you and I do without thinking about it. But he's got a broken compass.
Do we live in a world where mental health issues are acknowledged enough, and that there are services like Gilead Community Services out there and available? Does there need to be more? Certainly better than it was back in the day.
Certainly better than it was back in the day. There's still stigma.
There is.
And certainly access to services could be greatly improved. I feel very fortunate that my son qualified for services through the state of Connecticut. There is a mind-numbing amount of red tape and hoops to jump through to get you there. Huge barriers, I feel, to people having access to mental health services.
Why is that, do you think? Is it it's not simply a funding issue? And you know, another question I'll ask you is, why is there still a stigma about it?
I think it's scary to people. They don't understand it. It's unfamiliar. And to be honest with you, until I had a son with mental illness, it unnerved me.
That's a good point.
So I would tend to avoid people who didn't behave in a way that was familiar to me. And I think it's more just not understanding and ignorance, not in a negative way, but just lack of information.
People need to be educated about it, right?
People need to be educated and know that these are real human beings with the same kinds of needs and drives that you and I have. My son would love to have a girlfriend. He talks about having children. These are going to be a huge stretch for him.
Yeah.
And this is with all the support that we can imagine to give him. So his need for dignity is the same as yours and mine. Just because we don't take care of them doesn't mean that they're going to go away. They are certainly people just like the rest of us.
Yep, and they're part of our society, and they need to be helped and accepted, because like it or not, they are part of our society.
They are part of our society, and with support, many, if not most, can become functional and hold jobs and do well.
Now, as far as mental illness is concerned, maybe not necessarily speaking in medical terms, where you see improvement, if you do you see it more in the social aspects of society in general? But are there, I'm sure because you have a vested interest in it, do you see medical progress? Because mental illness is such a broad term in general.
It is. And I think there definitely is progress. I think there's a huge amount we still don't understand about the human brain and the human mind. So we have lots of opportunity to continue to expand our knowledge. But I think we've made huge gains. My son has autism, and when he was a child, he's 24 now, it was classical autism had been around, but it was a small percentage of the population. Now there's a much broader range of symptoms that are being recognized as autism, and it was a fairly new thing. Now you hear it all the time. You do. So I think we've certainly made a lot of progress.
And you talked about the stigma in society about it. Also, when you think of mental illness, also there's a political correctness that verbiage that you're supposed to use or not use. Even the term autism may not necessarily have been used a while back.
Well, and now we say developmental disabilities.
Yeah, right.
So, we keep trying to do better.
I mean, didn't they change the name of the Department of Mental Retardation? Doesn't exist with that name anymore because it was an unaccepted use of terminology, I guess, right?
Right, and that's now the Department of Developmental Disabilities, I believe. So, yeah, and I think that's all good, because I think often the terms that we have used traditionally to describe mental illness are stigmatizing, and so this is an effort to reduce that stigma.
Obviously, when you when you are touched personally by this, whether it be a relative or someone very close to you, that gives you more of an incentive to want to be involved. You always see that. If, like you said, before you really understood what mental illness was, before it was a part of your life, being with your son or really anybody, you were just like everybody else. Maybe you would have had sympathy, but maybe not necessarily would have been involved the way you are now, right?
Right. Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
And I have to say that my son does receive services now through Gilead Community Services, which has freed me up to be his mom.
Yeah.
And that's
instead of all those other things.
instead
that you
of
said,
all those
staff,
other things, and it's really made an opportunity for us to have a wonderful relationship and freed up my energy to do other things like be an advocate for Gilead and
what does that
mental health.
consist of? Obviously, coming on TV shows like this and kind of talking about it, getting the word out. Is that one of the big things?
It's a huge thing, being ambassadors, being advocates. You heard Barry talk about the funding challenges
Yes.
that we face. So our board is trying to diversify funding sources. We're trying to find other sources of private donations, grants, and also to advocate at the state level for more adequate funding for services.
Do you find yourself going up to the Capitol
I
as
do.
well as a parent?
I do.
I think that a parent's voice, you know, it's one thing, it's great that Barry as a CEO can go up there, but I think a parent going up there too, because you're, you know, a constituent, right?
I'm a constituent, and the way we work as human beings is if we become emotionally invested
Right.
or connected to an issue, we're much more likely to act.
You can kind of tug at the heartstrings a little
That's
bit
right.
more. Barry can ask for money, but you know, you can kind of tug at the heartstrings, and you know, if the politician actually has a heart, we're still checking that out for sure. But if they do, then you can kind of, you know, tap into that aspect of their soul, right?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because once when I spoke to legislators, I did invoke their hearts. There's a children's book called The Little Prince, and in that story, there's a wise fox who tells the little prince that it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. And I do think that's where we need to start, because our hearts tell us what is right and what we need to do. And if we listen to our hearts, then it's easy. I mean, we know what the next steps are.
Obviously, through the help of Gilead, it's gotten a little easier for you, but overall, I mean, you've probably learned so much more having the vested interest that you do about mental illness in general. And has your life gotten easier over the course of time in an accepting way, but also just in an everyday sort of a way? Like you said, you can kind of become just his mom a little bit more.
Enormously,
Yeah.
incalculably. I cannot tell you how much easier it is. I literally dropped out of sight for about 20 years just to take care of Ben. I mean, there was no time or energy left for anything else, and it's like I've been given a new lease on life.
Welcome back to the world, right?
Thank you, yeah.
So for those watching that may be connected to someone with mental illness, what would you say to them if they, you know, they don't know what the next move is, where to turn, what can they do, what sources are available to them out there?
There are certainly plenty of private practitioners, therapists. If it's someone who has a child in school, I would start there. That's a good way to kind of get connected to the system with a school social worker or a school psychotherapist. If it's someone who's in the community, there's word of mouth. I got help through private treatment programs that we had to use for our son, who kind of helped me find my way into the system.
From Barry's point of view, running a community service like Gilead, healthcare reform is important to him, and it'll change the industry and change maybe society in general. How about from your point of view? Is healthcare reform important for you and your family?
It certainly is. It's
Yeah.
enormously important. And as Barry says, this possibility of a more integrated approach to treating mental health as part of the body, and for it to be valued as important as a physical illness. If my son had a chronic physical illness, he would have no trouble getting insurance coverage or attention for that physical illness. Because it's a mental illness,
Yeah.
it's amazing the barriers that are in place to not only finding treatment, but finding coverage for that treatment.
Are insurance companies still, I mean, it's included in a lot of policies, but are they still resistant to?
They are incredibly resistant.
Yeah.
They find so many ways to decline and deny coverage. I appealed and went through the Office of the Healthcare Advocate to try to get mental health costs that Ben had as an adolescent covered. And it is an amazing battle. I think with the new healthcare law, there's supposed to be parity between physical and mental health, and that's long overdue.
We are out of time, so we will put the website for Gilead up on the screen one more time, and we thank you very much for sharing and coming on the show and being an advocate. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Fran Ludwig there, Barry Simon in the first segment. Pleasure having you both on the show. That's our show for today. You can watch the show on our YouTube page and on TV as well, plus many other shows up on our YouTube site as well. That's it for now. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. We will see you next time. Take care.